A federal judge ruled one of Sean Diddy Combs' many accusers must disclose her identity, or else her case will be dismissed. So she complied with the judge's order and refiled her suit against the embattled music mogul using her real name. The ruling came down last month when a federal judge wrote in her ruling there's a fundamental question as to whether the Jane Doe accuser has substantial privacy interest that outweighs the customary and constitutionally embedded presumption of openness in judicial proceedings. The judge said because Jane Doe filed her suit accusing a famous person of engaging in heinous conduct 20 years ago, the defendant has the right to defend themselves, and the people have a right to know who is using their court. The attorney who filed the suit on behalf of their client was Tony Busby, a high-powered Texas-based attorney who's brought a number of lawsuits against Combs since he's been behind bars in September. Busby at the time said he had a great respect for the court and its ruling. In a statement, he said, quote, "Our job as counsel for these victims is to protect their safety the best way we can, which is what we're trying to do by filing the cases anonymously. Anonymous or not, this case will proceed, period." The judge ruled Doe must file the lawsuit under her own name by November 13th, or the suit will be dismissed. And just a day before that deadline, the lawsuit was refiled. Now Jane Doe is plaintiff Candace McCrary. She alleges she received an invite to Combs' photo shoot in 2004 when she was 19 years old. According to the suit, she was flattered and excited to receive an invite from someone like Combs. So she went with her friend to the event and learned it was a photo shoot for DeBand, a music group Combs signed to his Bad Boy Entertainment label. According to the lawsuit, McCrary and her friend were then invited to an after party by Combs' business associates, but before the party, she met Combs during the photo shoot, and he allegedly told her and her friend to come to his hotel first for a more exclusive party. So they went and were taken to a Marriott hotel in Manhattan by a member of Combs' entourage. McCrary claims when she arrived to the hotel suite, at first she noticed about a dozen people there having drinks and listening to music in a relaxed party environment. But when she attempted to mingle with other party guests, McCrary and her friend were grabbed and taken to a separate room off from the main party. There's so much to unpack with the many lawsuits that involve Sean Diddy Combs, and part of the reason we're able to keep bringing you these stories is because of our great sponsors like Upside. You might be asking yourself, what's Upside? Well, it's a free app that gets you cash back on daily essentials like gas, groceries, and restaurants. Sometimes I only have time for a quick lunch break, but then there are times I can have a nice sit down at a restaurant and I can use Upside for both. Plus, I can use Upside to get cash back when I do. It's so easy and simple to use and completely free, so why not? And this is actual real cash back too. It's money that appears in your Upside app that you can transfer straight into your bank account. So here's what you do. You download the Upside app, claim an offer for whatever you're buying on Upside, you pay as usual using a debit or a credit card, and follow the steps on the app and get paid. You can use Upside at places like Chipotle, 7-Eleven, Taco Bell, and so many other places. So why not check it out and see if your favorite spot is on the app? To find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description to download Upside, or scan the QR code on your screen, use our promo code LCNews, and get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. Again, that's promo code LCNews for an extra 25 cents back on your first gallon of gas. According to the suit, McCrary believed the man taking them was a security guard, so she went with him. But when she asked the unnamed man where they were going, he allegedly said, "You know what you are here for." Once McCrary and her friend got to the bedroom, the security guard left the room and locked the door, leaving the two alone in the room with Combs. McCrary alleges Combs gave her and her friend drinks and instructed them to take cocaine he had prepared on the coffee table. But McCrary says she didn't want to do the cocaine, and Combs gradually became more aggressive and eventually began forcibly touching them without consent. According to the suit, when they resisted, Combs ordered McCrary's friend to perform oral sex on him, or else he would have them both killed. McCrary says her friend complied as she begged the mogul to let them leave. He allegedly didn't, and Combs, according to the lawsuit, forced McCrary to take her clothes off. And once she was undressed, the mogul allegedly forced himself on her and began to sexually assault her. The suit claims Combs fondled, molested, and ultimately raped McCrary while she begged him to stop. McCrary says the door opened and the security guard from earlier rushed in to ask if everything was all right. When that happened, her friend rushed out of the door, but McCrary couldn't move because Combs was allegedly still on top of her. The suit says Combs got off of her to talk to the security guard and he left the room, but told her to stay put, otherwise she would be killed. The filing says after about half an hour of sitting in the dark room by herself, another security guard came and told her she could leave. So she got her things and left the hotel and called a taxi back to her dorm in downtown Brooklyn. Since his arrest in September, he's also pleaded not guilty to charges including sex trafficking, racketeering conspiracy, and transportation to engage in prostitution. His defense team is fighting to have him released on bail ahead of his high-profile trial. He's already been denied twice, but his team is seemingly hoping third time will be a charm. But until that hearing happens, he remains behind bars in a federal detention center in Brooklyn, New York. Let's bring on now criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Safa Robinson Ferrer. Safa, always great to see you. I remember when the ruling came down that this Jane Doe had to refile her lawsuit under her real name. But are you surprised at all that she actually did?
I'm not surprised at all that she refiled the lawsuit here. There's allegations of abuse. There have been continued allegations of abuse revolving around Mr. Combs. This is a high profile case with a high profile defendant. It appears, and my guess would be that she's seeking monetary damages. And just like any other plaintiff in a lawsuit, here she is seeking what she feels that she is entitled to. And the only way for her to do it was to seek the court's permission to go under that Jane Doe status. But unfortunately, the court determined that no, she has to publicize her real name. And so she went and did that. So not a surprise there.
Do you think it may have set a dangerous precedent to have a Jane Doe refile her suit under her real name? And what message do you think it sends, this ruling, for others who are seeking justice but wanted that anonymity to protect themselves?
Absolutely. It's really difficult here, and there's a balancing test that's performed by the court. First and foremost, anytime there's a lawsuit that's in federal court, according to the rules, the plaintiff is supposed to disclose their name, and the defendant's name is also disclosed in that lawsuit. Not only that, but there has to be special permission by an individual to seek that anonymity, and part of the reason that happens is because these cases can be sensitive in nature. They allege sexual abuse. They allege other things that, have been harmful or detrimental to a plaintiff, whether it be STDs or things of that nature that are very sensitive to any person. And so an individual who may have had this experience, of course, will want to protect their privacy rights, in going forward with this litigation, but they want to seek some sort of justice. So I think it can scare off or set a dangerous precedent for plaintiffs as they decide to come forward. But there has to be a balancing between the plaintiff's privacy and the public interest in being aware of these lawsuits and what's going on.
Yeah, and I think, everyone in America at this point, especially, knows who Sean Combs is, and whether they know him as Puffy, Diddy, or Love, whatever you may call him. But what are your thoughts on the judge saying during her ruling that plaintiff's interest to avoid public scrutiny or even embarrassment doesn't outweigh the interests of both Combs and the public? Do you think the public has a right to know who is using the courts?
You know, it's an interesting thing here because under the First Amendment we have freedom of speech. Public or courtrooms are open to the public, and that is protected under that First Amendment right. And so we as a public have a right to know what's being litigated in this country, and that's the reason for that, is so that the public can know and be aware, and that is certainly a First Amendment right. Again, there's the balancing with a person's privacy right. And I think that although you do have a right to confront and face your accusers, and that's the most important thing that's protected by the Fifth Amendment here, there has to be, a way that we can proceed with these certain issues without placing victims or potential victims or alleged plaintiffs in a detrimental position when it comes to public scrutiny. Again, this is a high profile case. The stakes are high here for Mr. Combs, and he's certainly entitled to confront his accuser. But also there's a level of, sensitivity with these types of cases as well that should be protected.
Yeah, and I'm sure going, even though Combs is still behind bars right now, I'm sure still going against a powerful figure like him, even though he has had that fall from grace, essentially, can be very intimidating. In your opinion, what do you think it is like for the alleged victims in these cases to still be going against a powerful figure like Combs, even though we know now he's still behind bars? So what are your thoughts overall about people who do go against these powerful figures and these powerful celebrities?
I think in this case with Mr. Combs, I think there's power in numbers for these plaintiffs and for these alleged victims. There's one thing to have just one sole victim who may have difficulty speaking out. They don't want to be scrutinized. They, want people to believe them, or they don't want to have to deal with whether someone believes them or not, or is critical of what happened to them. But once Miss Ventura initially filed her lawsuit, and then we started seeing other lawsuits coming across the country, I think that there's a strength in numbers here with respect to plaintiffs in these cases, and not only plaintiffs but also victims, to say this happened to this person allegedly. Well, this also happened to me too, and now we can kind of form some or find some type of solidarity within one another as we proceed forward because this happened to me too.
Yeah, and going back to the allegations themselves, the lawsuit does read very similar to a lot of the other civil lawsuits Combs still faces. Candace McCrary, she alleges she met Combs when she was 19. He had allegedly raped her in a hotel room and forced her friend to perform oral sex on him, or else he would have both of them killed. What do you make of the allegations overall? And as the federal government alleges a pattern, do you think that the suits that have been filed since his arrest continue to give weight to the government's case?
I think the civil suits in this case definitely echo what's going on in federal court. The federal government's case against Mr. Combs basically says or is alleging that Mr. Combs participated in a pattern of activity that included force, threats of physical force to get people to engage in sexual activity, holding individuals against their will, and things of that nature. And these civil suits echo that pattern. They're essentially alleging also that these women or these men and women were held under the threat of force or physical violence to perform sexual acts with respect to Mr. Combs and his parties and freak offs and those sorts of things. So they back up what the federal prosecutors are alleging against Mr. Combs here, and I think that bolsters what their allegations are.
Yeah, and of course, Diddy, through his attorneys, have denied all the allegations against him. But do you think that Diddy's attorneys are surprised that McCrary did refile her lawsuit? I'm sure for them it was a win that the judge had ruled that the Jane Doe at the time that we know needed to refile her suit using her real name. But do you think it came as a shock to even his team that she actually did?
I don't think it would have come as a shock to his team. I think that, a part of the reason why these suits are filed on behalf of plaintiffs is because they are seeking justice in their eyes, but they're also seeking some sort of monetary compensation. And considering that, and I'm going to make an assumption, the plaintiff in this case, her seeking of monetary damages outweighed the idea that she wanted to remain anonymous in this case. And as a defense attorney, I don't think that's surprising, specifically if somebody wants monetary damages. And if the only way to do it is to disclose who they are or their identity, then it's not a surprise. And it wouldn't be a surprise to me either.
Yeah, and with all these civil suits kind of sitting on the back burner right now because of Combs' sex trafficking case, do you see a point where they are ever litigated to the full extent, given that, there's so many at this point?
It's going to be interesting to see how this goes. The federal prosecution is going to take a front seat to all of the actions that are pending against Mr. Combs, and so that's the highest priority right now for his defense team and for Mr. Combs and for the courts. He's got a right to a fair trial. He's got a right to a speedy trial. Not only that, but that's going to, like I said, take the first seat. The civil suits sit and will, at some point be litigated. And a lot of times with civil suits such as this, they end up going to mediation, they end up being settled. So the likelihood that those cases will see trial will be determined in the future, but more likely than not, I think they're going to ultimately end up in some sort of settlement if it gets there.
And of course, we'll continue to follow this, see how this all continues to play out. Safa, I want to thank you so much, as always, for your time and your insight into this case. Before we sign you off, I am going to ask you a final question. Diddy is hoping to be released on bail and has a hearing next week to discuss it. Do you think third time's going to be the charm for him?
I think Mr. Combs is going to sit in custody pending the trial. I don't think the third time is going to be the charm. Unfortunately, I think there have been too many red flags that have been raised to the judge, and so one of the things that the judge determines is whether or not the individual is a risk of flight. The second thing that they determine is if the individual is a threat to the community. And although he surrendered his passport, he still would be at risk of being a threat to the community. There's witness tampering and all of those sorts of things. So in the abundance of caution, I think that the judges have essentially said, Mr. Combs, unfortunately, you're going to sit here until we can get through this litigation, considering that there have been allegations of witness tampering and threats and things like that.
All right. And again, we'll continue to follow this to see how this outcome comes. Again, Safa, thank you so much for your time. Always appreciated.
Thank you.
Sean Diddy Combs' high-profile trial is slated to begin on May 5th of next year, but he is expected to appear in court on Friday, November 22nd for another bail hearing, and we'll have live coverage of that hearing, which will be on our YouTube channel. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Elizabeth Millner.